Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Halasnik, and I am co-founder and managing partner of Financing Solutions. Financing Solutions is the leading provider of lines of credit to small businesses. Our line of credit program is fast, easy, inexpensive, and costs nothing to set up, making it a great cash backup plan for your business. If you would like to learn more about our line of credit program, please visit us at fscreditline.com. That's FS as in Financing Solutions, creditline.com. Or give us a call at 862-207-4118. Just remember, the time to set up your credit line is now, not when you actually need it. Today, I am excited to be speaking with James Richardson from Premium Growth Solutions. Dr. Richardson is the founder of Premium Growth Solutions, a strategic planning consultancy for early-stage consumer packaged good brands. As a professionally trained culture anthropologist turned business strategist, he has helped nearly 100 CPG brands with their strategic planning, including brands owned by Coca-Cola, the Hershey Company, General Mills, as well as other emerging brands such as Once Upon a Farm, Dr. Squatch Soap, Proven Skincare, Rebel Creamery, and others. James is the author of the recent #1 best-selling book on Amazon on consultancy called in the category of business consultancy, called Ramping Your Brand: How to Ride the Killer CPG Growth Curve. James also hosts his own podcast called Startup Confidential. James, welcome to today's Entrepreneur MBA podcast.
Thanks for having me, Stephen. Excited to be here.
Good. So this is a good topic that we're going to be covering today because it really directly relates to the reason why I started the Entrepreneur MBA. Today's topic is insights on how to grow exponentially to 10 million as a small business. And the reason why I picked that topic is because I think when we all get into business, we're before you experience, you think, I want to build a $100 million company. I want to build a $500 million company. I mean, everybody might want to do that, but there are just so much conditions that need to exist. I never said that's what I wanted. I said, you know what? I want to be self-employed. I want to make a good living. I want to be able to call my own shots. And if I get that chance to build a $100 million company, that would be great. But, to me, what I saw was once you start getting over to $10 million in revenue, yes, it depends on the product or the service that you're doing, things start to open up for you. Right. And the reason why, one of the things that happens is people who want to acquire you start to get interested because, and again, it depends on the product, it depends on the service, there's different levels, but 10 million to me in the businesses I've been involved in was always the magic mark. So today, one of the things we're going to drill in is exactly the mission of what the Entrepreneur MBA podcast was about, and that is helping business owners grow over $10 million. So if you had to pick one thing, James, that every business owner could focus in on every single day, their #1 biggest priority, it could be a category, what would you say that #1 most important thing is to drive business over $10 million?
They need to understand accurately why people keep buying their product or service. And that
great response.
Is super easy to say. And I have found in my experience that this, and I'm sure people listening are in this headspace right now, when you are barely covering your fixed costs, when you're just trying to keep your head above water operationally, when you feel like a firefighter, in East LA, putting out fires every 10 minutes. It's very hard to carve out the emotional space to think about something pretty simple, which is interacting with your fans. And, fan is kind of it's a fun little word in media, right? I have fans. Um, because it comes from
Yeah.
media, right? It comes from Hollywood
Yeah.
and books, but businesses have fans too. And the businesses that grow exponentially, Stephen, really have fans. And as we talk, I can get in
Yeah.
more empirical about how that looks in the world that I'm in, but also in most other businesses, even a small local restaurant run by the humble immigrant couple, like the stereotype of the of the small restaurant in America. Uh, they can create rabid fan bases, and their business will grow exponentially when they do that. Uh, you cannot grow businesses to $10 million without someone else's millions involved, without fans. And the restaurant industry is particularly brutal in shutting down your dream if you don't have fans, because people don't really drive across town to a restaurant that isn't you know founded by a celebrity chef. So they're going to go to restaurants near them. It's as much like, it's a lot like supermarkets. It's a neighborhood game. So once you burn through the initial people who are interested in trying you out, you can't get them to come back. It's over. And what a lot of people don't realize is that it's not just because you burned out. It's like you burned through that initial group of people willing to try you or your restaurant. It's that they probably told a whole bunch of people that your restaurant is lousy. And
Yeah.
that's really painful
Yeah.
too,
That's
because
fair.
you didn't ask. And if you didn't ask and inquire early on, you wouldn't have caught the problems, perhaps, whether they were service related or menu related or ingredient quality or something that could have helped you course correct. And I work in the world of packaged goods. So, food, beverage, personal care, they're often made fun of as commodities by the software entrepreneurs. So, who are
Mm.
too cool for school. But the reality is these brands have been growing exponentially. New brands for the last 10, 20 years. There's a whole new wave of cool and sexy brands. And it started with Kind Bar and Skinny Pop and Vita Coco, coconut water, and even before that, vitamin waters. So, these are packaged widgets. They sit on the shelf next to boring old brands like Coca-Cola um, that have huge marketing budgets. And you would imagine it's impossible to take on someone like Coca-Cola and one of their brands, but it's actually is possible. It's just really, 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 really hard. And it's hard to do it without fans, because what I learned about exponential growth, because the data sort of forced me to become a student of it, I wasn't really interested. I wasn't focused on it at all. But when I was doing this work on early stage companies with large data sets of cash register data, we kept seeing this exponential growth curve appear again and again. And it looks like a quarter pipe ramp at a skate park. It's a beautiful thing. And it's not common in nature either, but you will find it. You'll find it on mountainsides and stuff like that. So, and we're trying to figure out, why were all the brands in food and beverage that scaled to 100 million and beyond, why did they all ride this bizarre curve? Because, and you'll appreciate this, Stephen, because you're a math guy. And I'm sure many of the listeners are data driven, but exponential curves are really annoying because in the beginning, there's no scale, like nothing's happening. It looks no different than a straight line. But underneath the hood, you have this furious beast, and it's usually doubling every year, and that's the metric I hand to my clients. Is, if you're at 500,000 or 750,000, I don't care. Your next year's target, double the business, and then what that does is it really forces you to pull out the stops on execution to make that happen, because it's not particularly easy to do that. So, but the math has two components. One is um, repeat purchase of your product or service. So again, repeat visits to a restaurant, repeat purchase of your cool new nutrition bar, and then this thing called word of mouth. And when you have both, And the word of mouth could be coming from the fans, and it could be coming from, casual buyers. Doesn't matter. When you have both those forces, you have habitual users who create a efficient cash flow for your local restaurant or for a locally run CPG business, which is often where my clients start. They just start in one city selling their nutrition bar. They sell it into Whole Foods, to a division. They sell it into maybe one other channel, and they sell it online. And they're trying to get people to buy it again and again. And once you can create those fans who have actually inserted it into their life as a habit, right? So think about that favorite Thai place that people used to go to or are now returning to, if it's still open. It's depressing.
Yeah.
But, your favorite Thai restaurant, I'm guessing that you went to a bunch of Thai restaurants before that one. Because, when I was in Seattle and we had lots of Asian food, I was super picky. Now I'm not picky at all because I'm in Arizona.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm really picky about my
Yeah.
Mexican food. But
Yeah.
you decide, you do your research, you try stuff out, and then you hone in on something you really, really like, and you just keep going there. And you go there again. That's how a local restaurant succeeds, because what it does is it achieves something called conversion. And every product and service business converts. It's actually easy to measure service-related conversion because you always collect information from your customers in a service. You always do. If you're just selling like at Whole Foods, you may or may not have any information on your customers. And this is why in my business, I really scream loudly about interacting with your early fans. Why are they buying again? Because when you want to get to 10 million, it's true that a great product, word of mouth, and that habitual buying will take you a large amount of the way there. But the earlier that you can figure out what I call the key outcomes, the behavioral and emotional outcomes that people want from your product or service, and you can start to put that on in your marketing materials, start to put it on your website, and start reinforcing, start speaking the language of your fans, not the original language you used when you started the company, because they're often very different. And in some service and product worlds, Steve, like the difference between the outcomes that drive trial and the outcomes that drive habitual repeat purchase are like totally different. For instance, some people might, like in my world, they might misread a package. They might pick it up because it's gluten-free, but then once they have it the second time, they're reading it like, oh, wow, this is really low carb, because the package was poorly designed and it didn't explain a much more compelling proposition well. Like maybe it had a giant gluten-free label on it, but in reality, it was like the lowest carb product in the category. And, if you're in my world, you know that low carb beats gluten-free on scalability and market size like 10-1 in most cases. So it's like, if you can claim that about your carb, that should be the big thing on your package, and put the gluten-free on the back of the package. So that's actually a CPG version of a marketing mistake, which happens on the package. And in service businesses, it might be on your website. You may be promoting an outcome that isn't that important to your fans, and you're missing the one or two big ones. And so
Yeah, and I guess that's where
learning from your consumers how to steer your marketing is so important.
I guess, and that's, I like the example that you used too, where I guess if you were the business owner, and you speak to your fans often, you might hear that one of the benefits that you didn't know about was the fact that it was lower calorie than everybody else. And by talking to them, because I think, we all get in this phase where we had our heads down in the business and we don't talk enough to our clients, Like I had a really good podcast a while ago. It certainly wasn't as good as yours, James, but, and I actually have a sticky note here that I'm holding up that it was on customers and stuff like that. And he says, call your customers and ask questions. Ask them what challenges they're facing. He said, don't ask about your product. Just start a conversation. He goes, it'll naturally go there. And, I still have this here. Honestly, have I gone and done it? I haven't, and it bugs me. It bugs me that I haven't gone out. I assume that the message that we are hitting on our note on our website is what we think clients want.
Right.
Now we do talk to them, and when they use their line of credit, of course. So that's, but
Well, I know that in
So I
in
agree with
financial
what you're saying.
services, I know one of the big things that people miss is they don't talk about the emotional outcomes. And almost no one does. And I think anybody who would just in their marketing copy be able to communicate that they want to get you to an emotional place with their service, they're going to stand
Yes.
out immediately, because
Yeah.
everybody's talking about their interest rate and their yada yada and all the numbers, and they're almost all the same. So,
Yeah. And I'm a marketing guy, so to me, it's intuitive to
yeah,
me to bring out
yeah.
emotions. That's very intuitive. So yes, you're absolutely right. And I think the big question I have for you, James, that I think has always been in the back of my head is I always thought that the idea behind branding doesn't really apply to a small business owner like it applies to a
Mm,
big business owner,
right.
a big business. It's just, branding budgets and all this other, that's a nice to have, but it's not a must have for a business that's under, $5 million in size. Now, again, it depends on your
Yeah.
product, your service. What's the
So
correct answer to
the
that
correct answer is we've got to define our
question?
term really, really
Uh-huh.
carefully. And I have done this. So, I do it in my book too. The word brand, that's a cultural term. Like, that's a term ordinary people use. It's not some technical term. You don't have to go to business school to discover it,
Uh,
right? And what we mean by the word brand culturally is basically what you just alluded to. It is a brand, I define as an outcome. It's a cultural outcome. It's when your trademark, which is the trademark registered name of your business, whatever that is, and in my world, it's that big name on the package, Oreo. It's when that symbol has accreted some very coherent meanings related to the experience of consuming the product or service. And that takes time. It generally takes years. That can be accelerated, though, if you do what we were just talking about, which is that you um, listen to your fans early on, and you really essentially tighten that feedback loop so that the symbolism and the marketing copy and everything else around your trademark is actually talking to other fans, like in a way that they reflects their experience of your thing, right? And not your view of your business as the founder, which is often very different. um,
mm,
and that feedback loop is something that small business owners actually have the ability to quickly tighten. If you were to work like I used to do in consulting for big public companies, they just can't make decisions quickly. So for them to redo a package is like a 2-year project. I kid you not. For my
mm.
clients, we'll spend half a day redoing the package design. 2 days later, it's done. The design's done with the graphic designer, and then they print it the next packaging run. So it'll be done in a couple of months. That's how nimble you can be, and you have to be. But you're correct, Stephen, in that branding as a line item or as a strategic exercise, that's something you do for an established trademark that already has strong cultural meanings. Like, we know what an Oreo is all about because most of us have had one, right? We know exactly what it does in our mouth. We know the kind of moments where we want that. And we've had 80 years as a society to figure that out. It's like a collective
Yeah.
process of, an Oreo establishing some kind of normative experience for everybody, right? But when you're a small business starting out, your name, it means nothing. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Like, and I went through the same process launching my own consultancy. It's like, you don't signify anything linguistically, right? Your business name means a lot to you because you've put your whole life savings into it and your ego and everything is on the line. But that just means it's emotionally high stakes for you. In the public, it doesn't have any clear meaning until people try it. And this is where people can get sucked into what I call over designing and getting sucked into work with agencies who actually have a client base, which is really about what? It's about defending existing businesses that already have a clear meaning and already have a clear role in our lives, right? But a new brand, it's like we don't know what to do with this yet. We don't know quite what to make of it, so we have to have it a few times, and then we start to get it. And those are early fans. They can clue you in onto what you have, what your brand is going to eventually mean. But this is a multi-year process, and I think what drives me nuts is when people with a little too much seed money, they go hire some branding agency to design in my world, their package and all this other stuff. And it's like, and their website and all this stuff. And I'm like, when I work with clients who are early, I tell them, look, this is just a hypothesis. All your marketing copy, all your symbolism, everything. It's all a guess. We're just guessing here. Until you get information from your fans that your guess was correct, you need to look at it as just a rough draft. That's all it is. It's the first draft of your novel. And that's really hard to do, I think, especially in my world, which is very working capital intensive just to get to market, because you have to pay upwards of $100,000 in cash just to get a production run to ship to a retailer. I mean, it's a lot of money out the door. So it's very hard to look at that giant shipment as a draft, but it is. It is a draft.
Yeah.
It's a little easier to do what I'm talking about in a service-based business, even a restaurant, because you can make menu tweaks pretty quickly, relatively speaking. The nice thing about restaurants is Cisco, they deliver every day in your neighborhood. So you could switch up, you could get new ingredients in 2 days as a small business. In my world, you actually can't pivot that easily. So it does tempt people to think too rigidly when they launch, that their experiment is done. And that's what I talk about in the first part of my book, is you're iterating. You have to think of yourself as an iterative entrepreneur in those early years of small business. And that will force you to listen. And then the listening will cause you to get the information that will then allow you to finish your draft, right? To use a media analogy. And then you can finish your product or service and fine tune it. And man, I've been doing that myself. I mean, in my business, what's challenging is that the number one problems the average small business has in consumer packaged goods, I don't have the particular skills to help them with. And I don't want to, and it's not my expertise, all three, right? So it's like the number one burning questions they have, like I am basically of no use to them. And there's other people who can specialize in getting a manufacturer, in getting a broker, in working with a distributor, right? So, and that's 99% of the question. So I work with larger companies in that 5 million plus range who have got everything going, they're humming, but now they have to figure out how to keep growing. And the way you do that is you fine tune the beast, right? You make sure that your package symbolism is perfect.
Yeah, I like the two things that you said so far. One of them wasn't so unconventional, because I think we just, as business owners, all forget to do it as much as we should. The number one is focus on your customer. So far, that's what you said, right? And I think we're running around. We're learning how to be business owners. There's a million things going on, and we don't get that close to our customers. So I think that's number one. The number two is, I think, an unusual way of looking about how to grow your company. It's, again, it's a little bit easier if you're product focused versus service oriented. But I think it's still a great way to look at growing your business exponentially. And that is, look for closely with your customers, for emotional content. Because the emotional content will allow you to build your brand, drive your message through your website, your marketing material. And then the third thing it does is it galvanizes all your employees and your staff, right? Because, you're right. Like you think about like financing solutions. that my name of Financing Solutions, that doesn't have an emotional response to my employees, you know? But when I say to my emotional response is, hey, my employees, hey, you know how many times I hear from my clients that we
Yeah.
saved their ass? That, that you should feel good that people are now
Right.
getting paid because the owner had access to a line of credit. That completely changed the emotional content to my employees of
Yeah. And
what they do for a
I worked
living.
in a company that never did that storytelling. So
Mm.
I'll back you up on that one, man. And it was toxic because
Yeah, I think
the founder was only interested in his pot of gold for himself. So.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I like the word that you used there, and that is, a good business owner is also a good
Yeah, and
storyteller,
but they also,
right? I mean, it's a unique skill set. I don't mean it's a good business. I mean, it's a good trait to have
yeah,
if you can do it. Some business owners are technical; they
there
don't have
is
that skill
something
set. So, you know,
powerful about collecting the patterns of your fans and then bringing that into your organization and sharing that. Because I think there are certain kinds of services where people don't realize the impact they're having on clients. It's not always clear. And there's product businesses that aren't realizing the impact they're having on their customers as well if they don't get out there and ask. And I think it's a huge morale booster to collect fan comments, especially when they're specific about what they like about your thing. And I think it's worth doing for morale. I think it's worth obviously doing for strategic planning, so that you're not steering your business into a ditch. And I think a
yeah,
lot of I'll go back to my Thai restaurant thing because the Thai restaurant um, sector, which I know way too much about, more than anyone should through some friends of mine. It was one of those ethnic groups that came to America in what can only be described as minuscule volume. So the number of Thai
yeah,
people like who live in America who were raised in Thailand is so small it's not even countable, right? Of all
mm,
the Asian Pacific groups. So, and they have a tight network in every city that they're in. They all know each other. So they network like immigrants, but they're also really small. And because they came in really small and they had to lean on something like restaurants because they didn't come in with skills. If you ever been to for those of you who listen, been to Thailand and had like actual Thai food, you will you will probably understand that challenge they were up against, which is that Thai food basically is totally unpalatable to your average American. I mean, they would just spit it out almost every dish. It's either too hot
too
or
hot.
it's got too weird umami, it's got weird textures, or the noodles are weird. I mean, basically, it's a giant bucket of weird. And I talk about this in my book because weird doesn't scale in America. Weird, weird, it,
Wow, that's a great
weird
concept.
is gets a lot of
I like that.
press time, right? Anomalous things get press
Yeah.
time. And weird, kale chips has gotten a lot of media time, Stephen. Kale chips, it's been written about, but they don't grow. Those businesses don't grow, and then they never will grow because a kale chip is just not a good cultural fit in the snacking culture of the United States, and it never will be. Now, if you
It's
take it to
almost
Japan,
what it's
if you
almost
take it
like
to Japan, if
what
you take it
Whole
to
Food.
Japan, kale
Yeah,
chips could
yeah,
do fine.
yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's almost like what Whole Foods or Kings out in the East Coast or some other ones. They almost they have the ability to mass market weird
yeah, well, it's
foods.
that process. I mean, that's what I talk about in the book, and that's my specialty: is how do you take rare, what would be statistically rare symbolism in your category of product or service, and how do you get a large following to suddenly love it and to see it as the next
Yeah,
thing? But go back to the Thai restaurant thing. What Thai restaurateurs quickly figured out was they needed to Americanize every single dish. And so there
yeah,
is almost no Thai restaurant in the United States that serves anything remotely authentic. I hate to disappoint you all. You're all being fed BS, and you like it.
yeah.
And this is not even the food they eat. So even the cute Thai owner in the back who's smiling from the kitchen, she doesn't eat this stuff. I guarantee you. She is literally concocting the public recipe for the American market. And it has a lot of sugar. It has a different spice mixture and spice ratio and yada, 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 yada. So it's, in fact, when Thai expatriates go to a local Thai restaurant, they always ask for a custom sauce to be made. But I think, they were not going to have any business if they didn't figure this out. Right? I mean, you can't fight some of these sensory expectations, right, with a foreign cuisine. You can only fight it so hard. And Thai is much worse than India. Indian food, when I lived in India for 3 years, Indian food has a lot of overlap with America. They love salt. They love potatoes. They love fat. So it's like there's a lot of overlap. And that's why Indian food is, it's done pretty well with no marketing and very little adaptation. But Thai food is like another universe. So but you can make it work. But the key is you've got to listen. You've got to be creative and you got to iterate.
Yeah, using that restaurant analogy too, I think, when you're under $5 million in sales, you do have a strategic advantage in that you are still small enough where the owner can really be involved. My wife and I talk about this. There was this one restaurant we used to go to several years ago. Now I live 50 minutes outside of New York City, and we go to New York often. But we used to go to this one restaurant in New Jersey, and the owner of the restaurant knew us by our first names. When we came in, he would always come over to the table. He would spend, I'd say, a good 20 minutes talking to us, a half hour. It's one of the only restaurants that we've ever been to where, we would go back to over and over again just because of the owner. And, and we haven't found a relationship like, I do have a new one like that. That's right. I forgot, but I'm not going to talk about it. But so I think you have a strategic advantage when you are a small company to be able to do that, to will your business to get to 5 million or over. But then at some point you got to be able to turn it off, and you got to be able to build systems and processes and other things in place so that you can have a bigger company.
That's like, so, and that even with local restaurants, because I just spent almost 20 years living in Seattle, so I watched multiple high-end independents turn into local chains with 5, 6, 7, 8 locations, and that means you had that proven formula that had a large market, and you're able to replicate it and systematize it. But it was all built on, you're right, that level of pretty high touch customer service. And if you look at the math behind exponential growth, and this is true in a lot of service businesses as well, the people who habitually come to you and buy your thing, in most small businesses that are customer focused, right? They're not selling like industrial goods or something. They produce 80% of the revenue or more. Right? Because you just open up an Excel sheet and just imagine with your own price points for your product or service, how much revenue you can generate every year from someone who's buying you once a month versus once a year. Right. And so suddenly it becomes clear that the once a monther is like super valuable. So if you can mathematically identify these people, or like you were saying, just notice the people, just pay attention as the owner in the restaurant and notice the faces that keep showing up, and then make sure you go straight to their table once they start reappearing, and have a personal conversation and create memorability and create that emotional hook. Because what you're doing is you're defending that habit, you're defending that loyalty and getting them to come back. That can absolutely reap huge financial rewards early on, because every repeat consumer that you retain is just that much more. It's a larger percentage of your total P&L. You're right. As you get bigger, that kind of high touch loyalty stuff is going to have less of an effect. But hopefully by then you will have the cash flow to do more aggressive reminder things, which is the advertising game, right? So,
yeah, we have a couple more minutes, and maybe what I'd like you to do is tell us one other thing from your book that also involves exponential growth that we that you would say would be the second most important thing, other than building raving fans, so to
Um,
speak?
I think the second most important thing would be um, pacing, uh, pacing your scale up operationally. So it's very tempting in my world to add a whole bunch of retail stores. Right? Let's go add 1,000 stores because I know that that could double my business because of the orders, right? Um, or in the restaurant world, oh, let's prematurely add 3 locations, you know, because because it I've proven that this many bodies will come into restaurant number one, and so when I've had too many beers, I do simple math, which is dangerous, and I just multiply by 3, and I see lots of greenbacks in my eyes, right? And this is very easy to do. And if you're not even covering your fixed costs, it's super seductive to say, I know what I'll do. I'll do the easiest thing, which is I'll get more locations, I'll get more retail orders, boom. And the problem is that if you can't operationally service that expansion, not only will they not perform like the restaurant number one or the first 500 stores, but you might actually go bankrupt dealing with the financial chaos. That's the reality. And in a restaurant business, which is, you know, lower margin than my world by a factor of like 2x, like 30% is profitable. You really get into trouble when you add locations prematurely before you've got, your financial systems in place. But the real thing is, how do you reproduce the experience? Like, how do you,
Yeah,
when you're not standing there?
yeah,
So, um, pacing your scale up is so key because it's easier. Credit is fairly easy for small. I know people don't want to hear this. It's relatively easy for small business people in the US. Go to a country like India and see what it's like to get credit. That doesn't involve a criminal. It's very hard to get
yeah,
credit in
yeah,
Asia as a small business, unless you're
yeah,
already a rich person. It's real. I mean, this is one reason
yeah,
why business people come to America to start small businesses, because it's actually not that hard. So the challenge is
yeah,
that because it's so easy to get credit, it's easy to jump for shortcut growth techniques, and that's what I mean by pacing. So you've got to let the organic growth in the business, let the growth in your fans and the money you're making from them month over month, that should be your sign after 6 to 9 months of month over month growth. That's your sign that it's time maybe to add a new restaurant or, you know, add some more stores. But what I see a lot of people do is they just jump to those operational route to growth, which in CPG is adding retail stores, and in restaurants it's adding some locations, um, and it's seductive. It's super seductive, but it's often an illusion. You need to let they call it organic growth for a reason, which is that with your existing operational infrastructure, you're growing your sales and you're not changing anything. Same staff, you know, same number of retail doors, same product lines, and your sales are still growing. And when you see that, that's how you know you're on the path to exponential growth, because word of mouth is the only explanation for that early on. In other words, people are coming back, you have repeat customers, and they're telling other people. Because at this point, you haven't done any advertising, right? Or minimal. So we know that's not the variable. So people are telling people, oh my God, you've got to go to this Thai restaurant. No, no. I know everyone says that. This is actually the best one you've ever been. So, and when you get people
yeah.
doing that, that's the sign that, oh, wow, maybe we should have a little Thai restaurant chain, because we have something.
Yeah, I think the more experienced you are as a business person, the more you're willing to take your foot off the accelerator to make sure you have the
Yeah.
formula
Yeah.
down first before you kind of expand. I know, I've been lucky enough to build a number of companies, and it's so interesting to see how quickly and the sixth one ramps up uh, uh, compared to the second one that we
Mm.
did, right? But how we are not willing to hit the accelerate yet until we make sure we have all the fundamentals
Yeah.
down.
That is a very mature level of self-discipline in business. And the funny thing, in my world, for some reason, the serial entrepreneurs, they actually get sloppier in consumer packaged goods. I'm not going to name names, but I have just a crazy number of very rich people who made a lot of money on the first business. And then they somehow, they literally somehow think that, I don't know, they have the Midas touch now, like the gods have blessed them. And so now they don't have to
I see it all
go
the
through the
time.
hell that they went through in business number one. And I sit here, I mean, I read about this stuff in the press and I just shake my head. I'm like, it must be a function of money that makes people lose all touch with reality. But it's like, there's no scientific basis for that assumption. In fact, there's a book that came out by Professor Tom Eisenman's Why Startups Fail. And he did research on this. Only about 20% of serial founders in the tech world actually have a successful business the second time around. Because
well, I think tech has its own
like,
rules. I mean, tech is also, tech is sometimes an entrepreneur will, be happy about telling people how much their company raised. I'm like,
I know.
That doesn't mean
to a finance
anything.
guy, that's really hilarious. Yeah, I know. I get you.
Yeah, I know it is.
It's sort of like saying to my wife, "We're doing fine with our household budget. I just took out 5 more credit cards." We had 2, and now we have 5. So
yeah. I think I agree with you too. About going back to something else you said, and that is, listen, good for you if you had successful first business. Okay.
Yeah.
Go do it again.
Same Karate Kid wax on, wax off again. And it never will change.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's the problem.
Yeah. And it's hard because if you keep doing it over and over again and you're successful, well, then there's something to you being a good businessman. So and listen,
I can count on one hand the number of people in consumer packaged goods who have that track record. It's amazingly tiny, a good list of people. And that's why I always laugh. Like when I meet the cocky guy trying to do his second business, I'm like, oh no.
Yeah. And I think the issue is, I think that the smarter entrepreneurs who are serial at doing it, they'll pull the plug earlier.
Yes. They'll bury the second and third failure.
Yeah, they'll know when to get out. They'll be like, "This isn't working."
Well, I think that's the challenge. Is when it's your first business, just like your first book or your first novel, or like in school, the first massive term paper you wrote that wasn't very good. It's really hard to swallow that the first time around. I think you're right. And when but the more humbled folks realize that every idea that you turn into a business is essentially an experiment, and sometimes they do just fail. I mean, usually it's because your idea didn't have the right market, didn't have the right audience. And in the language I use in my book, Ramping Your Brand, it's usually because founders are geeks in their world, whether it's your world like finance, and they just market a service to geeks. That's like a guaranteed route to nowhere. It's sort of like if I had created my website to speak to former anthropologists who have created consumer brands, and I just wanted to talk academic nonsense at them, that would be like the same kind of mistake. Instead, I had to spend a couple of years learning about meeting entrepreneurs, talking with them, and learning how to speak with them, and getting inside their psyche, because I didn't fully understand it.
Yeah. Well, James, it's all good stuff. I mean, I think I could sit here and talk to you all day, or I could read the book too. So, yeah. And so, again, the book is Ramping Your Brand, How to Ride the Killer CPG Growth Curve, and that's on Amazon. So unfortunately, we're going to have to move on. Ran out of time today in our podcast. So I'd like to thank so very much James Richardson from Premium Growth Solutions for coming on to today's podcast. If you like today's podcast, please feel free to share it with a friend and also subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. And of course, if you're looking for a line of credit for your business, you can call us at 862-207-4118 or visit our website at fscreditline.com. James, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
Well, I think they're welcome to send me an email at admin@Premium Growth Solutions if they really have a burning question. But other than that, I would refer them to my website, premiumgrowthsolutions.com, if they want to learn more about what I do with clients.
Yep. And I think anytime you can use marketing to grow your business, it's probably the smartest thing you can invest your time in as well. So to our listeners, if you have any interest in getting new business ideas, I tweet daily about lessons for business owners at Halasnik. It's Halasnik. And, I want to thank all our listeners. The Entrepreneur MBA podcast has become very popular. And I just want to remind you all that you can never go wrong by focusing on your customer. So just carve out some part of your day. I know I got to do it again myself. I am not doing a good enough job of it. And that's what I'm going to do. So everybody have a fantastic day. Enjoy your business and enjoy your life. This has been a rough year. Let's get out there and enjoy things again. Everybody have a great day.